I am going to say something the survival food companies will not like. Most people preparing for a food shortage do not need more food. They need fewer foods chosen with more sense. I have seen garages packed with expensive buckets, strange powders, and enough random cans to stock a small store. It looked impressive until you asked one question. What can you make for supper? A shelf can be full and still fail you. If the foods do not work together, if they take too much fuel to cook, or if your family refuses to eat them, you have not built a food plan. You have built expensive clutter. You need 9 ordinary foods. That is all. Together, they cover steady calories, useful protein, enough fat to keep your strength, and flavors people will actually eat when life stops feeling familiar. And I am not making you wait until the end for the first big payoff. Near the beginning, I will show you the forgotten calorie source that can make the difference between maintaining your strength and slowly running out of it. Halfway through, we will get to the one food on this list that practically refuses to die. But number 1 locks everything together. It costs about $12, can last for decades when stored properly, and supports every other food on this list. You do not need a bonfire of panic buying. You need 9 good logs laid in the right order, and the first one is not dramatic. On a cold morning with the power out, that is exactly why it works. Number 9 is old-fashioned rolled oats. My mother kept oats for the same reason she kept matches in the kitchen drawer. They were cheap, dependable, and needed no instructions. When a household is under stress, a familiar breakfast matters more than people think. A warm bowl of oats does not look like an emergency ration. It looks like breakfast. Children recognize it. Older folks can eat it easily, and on a morning when the lights will not come on, a little normality is worth storing. Oats cook quickly, so they do not demand much fuel. Add powdered milk and they become richer. Add honey, and people stop calling them plain. Stir in peanut butter, and one bowl carries surprising energy. Buy the plain kind, not flavored packets that cost more and give you less. Keep them cool, dry, sealed, and in use. A pantry should not be a museum. Oats earn the 9th spot because they are inexpensive, familiar, and useful from the first morning. But oats still need water and heat. Number 8 looks like a minor cooking ingredient. In truth, it fills the most dangerous calorie gap in the entire pantry. Number 8 is cooking oil, or another shelf-stable fat. Most beginners overlook it because a bottle of oil does not look like a meal. It is not impressive on a pantry shelf, and nobody gets excited about opening one during an emergency. But this is the forgotten calorie source I promised you. 1 tablespoon of oil contains roughly 120 calories. Add a few spoonfuls to a pot of rice and beans, and you can increase the energy in that meal without increasing its size. That matters when you are eating simple food while doing harder work, hauling water, cutting wood, clearing debris, or trying to keep a cold house running. A pantry without fat may keep your stomach full, while your body slowly loses weight and strength. Vegetable oil and canola oil are inexpensive and easy to cook with. Coconut oil and ghee are other useful choices. You do not need all 4. Store the one your household already uses. And do not buy a 5-year supply just to feel prepared. Oil is not immortal. It can turn rancid. Keep a practical amount. Write the purchase date on each container. Use the oldest bottle first and replace it during ordinary grocery trips. That gives you a working supply instead of a forgotten collection. Oil makes rice more satisfying, beans more substantial, and plain meals easier to eat day after day. But there is one obvious problem. Oil helps you cook, but what happens when there is no electricity, no working stove, and no fuel to spare? Number 7 gives you protein the moment you open it. Number 7 is canned meat. Tuna, chicken, salmon, Spam, corned beef. Choose the kinds your family already eats. That last part is not a polite suggestion. It is the rule. Years ago, I saw a man fill an entire shelving unit with bargain cans his family had never tasted. His wife read the labels and asked, "Who exactly did you buy all that for?" She had a point. The best stored food is the one somebody will actually open when they are tired, worried, and hungry. Canned meat gives you ready-to-eat protein without water, electricity, or cooking fuel. You can eat it straight from the container. You can fold it into rice, add it to beans, or use a little at a time to give a plain meal more flavor and substance. When the power is out and every match and cup of clean water matters, food that is already cooked has done half the work for you. Buy extra cans of what already disappears from your kitchen. Eat the oldest, replace it, and let normal life keep the shelf fresh. Number 7 keeps protein available when cooking is difficult. Number 6 does something different. It takes several dry ingredients and makes them feel like actual meals again. Number 6 is powdered milk. People remember rice, they remember beans. Almost nobody remembers milk until the refrigerator stops humming. Then breakfast changes, coffee changes, baking changes. Children notice, older people notice. The whole kitchen feels a little less like home. Powdered milk makes other foods work harder. Mix it into oats or coffee. Use it in bread, sauces, or soups. It brings protein, calcium, richness, and a familiar taste to repetitive ingredients. My mother called these the things that finish the meal. You rarely noticed them first. You simply noticed when they were missing. Buy plain, non-fat, dry milk. Seal it away from heat, light, air, and moisture. Milk packaged specifically for long storage can last for years. Ordinary boxes should remain in regular rotation. That is not a weakness. Rotation is how a working pantry stays alive. Use one box, keep another behind it, and replace what you use. The goal is not to own ancient food. The goal is to have good food when you need it. Powdered milk earns its place because it bridges the gap between eating ingredients and eating a meal. And number 5 can sweeten that milk, rescue a plain bowl of oats, and sit quietly on a shelf longer than almost anything else in your kitchen. Number 5 is real honey. Honey is the stubborn survivor of this list. It can darken, thicken, and turn grainy enough to look completely ruined. It is not ruined. Set the container in warm water, and the crystals will begin to soften. Honey was doing that long before anybody printed a best buy date on the bottle. That is the second payoff I promised you. When it is properly stored, real honey practically refuses to spoil. But permanence is only part of its value. Honey provides quick energy. It improves powdered milk and oats. It can soothe an irritated throat. And it gives a household something sweet when every day begins to taste the same. Never underestimate that last job. Rice and beans can keep a person fed. A spoonful of honey can remind that person that life is about more than being fed. Older generations guarded small comforts because they understood people. A family can tolerate plain food much longer when one familiar pleasure remains. Buy pure honey, keep the lid tight, and protect it from moisture. One ordinary jar can do more useful work than a dozen expensive emergency desserts. Honey protects morale. Number 4 protects the moments when nobody has the time, fuel, or energy to prepare a meal at all. Number 4 is peanut butter. I never claimed it was elegant. I only claimed that it worked. Open the jar, take a spoon, and you have calories, fat, protein, and a familiar taste without heating a single drop of water. That makes peanut butter especially valuable when everything goes wrong at once. Maybe you are clearing debris after a storm. Maybe you have spent the day carrying water. Maybe you are simply too tired to make supper. A few spoonfuls can keep you moving until a proper meal is possible. Stir it into oats to make breakfast more filling. Spread it on bread or crackers. Thin it with warm water and a little salt to make a simple sauce for rice or lentils. Most importantly, people will eat it. Half of good preparation is storing foods that do not start an argument at the table. Buy the shelf-stable kind your household already likes. Keep a few jars, use them normally, and replace them as they disappear. Peanut butter is not a monument designed to sit untouched for 30 years. It is a working food, and that is better. Number 3 may be the cheapest item here. Without it, however, nearly every cooked food on this list becomes harder to face day after day. Number 3 is iodized salt. A plain carton costs almost nothing and works harder than half the expensive emergency products on the market. Salt makes rice worth eating. It wakes up beans, improves oats, sharpens canned meat, and gives you the foundation for nearly every simple meal you can build from this list. Keep it dry, and salt lasts essentially forever. Treating flavor as a luxury is foolish. Hunger is not the only thing that wears people down. Eating food they hate, meal after meal, wears them down too. Our grandparents understood this without giving speeches about morale. They salted the pot because supper had to be eaten, and tomorrow's supper had to be eaten as well. Choose ordinary iodized table salt. The iodine gives it nutritional value beyond flavor, and there is no need to pay extra for a fashionable color or a story about a distant mountain. Buy several cartons. They are inexpensive, easy to store, and capable of making every grain, bean, and meat in your pantry more useful. The first 7 foods make this pantry livable. The final 2 give it its backbone. Number 2 has fed families for generations, but one small cooking technique can make it far more practical when fuel is limited. Number 2 is dried beans and lentils. This is your long-haul protein, A small, inexpensive bag can become a large pot of filling food with protein, fiber, and enough substance to keep hunger away for hours. But beans and lentils are not exactly the same tool. Beans are cheap, hearty, and extremely versatile, but they usually require soaking and longer cooking. Lentils cook faster, require no overnight soak, and become especially useful when every minute of cooking fuel matters. Keep both if you can. Here is a fuel-saving method worth remembering. Cover dry beans with water and bring them to a boil. Let them boil briefly, turn off the heat, cover the pot, and leave it alone for about an hour. The trapped heat begins softening the beans without forcing you to keep the stove burning the entire time. You still need to drain them and cook them fully afterward, but the quick soak can reduce the amount of fuel required later. My mother would not have called that an emergency technique. She would have called it refusing to waste fuel. Lentils are the quicker answer. Add water, salt, and a little oil, and you have a filling meal from a bag that costs very little. But beans and lentils are not the ending. Combine them with number one, and they become the center of a pantry capable of producing meal after meal without draining the grocery budget. If you can afford only one item this week, number one is where you begin. Number one is white rice. Not because it is the most exciting food here, it is not. White rice is the bed of coals beneath the other 8 foods. Inexpensive, calorie-dense, familiar, easy to combine, and capable of lasting for decades when packed correctly and kept cool and dry. And a plain 20-pound bag can still cost around $12. It does not look dramatic. Good, real preparedness rarely does. For long-term storage, choose white rice instead of brown rice. Brown rice contains natural oils that cause it to lose quality much sooner. Store white rice dry in an airtight container. Reduce its exposure to oxygen and protect it from heat, moisture, and pests. Under the right conditions, it can remain usable for 25 to 30 years. That is why it closes the countdown. White rice is not the biggest surprise on this list. It is the piece that proves these are not 9 random foods. Rice and beans give you the dependable center of a hot, filling meal. Add oil, and the same bowl carries far more energy. Add canned meat, and you bring in ready-to-eat protein, fat, and flavor. Add salt, and simple food becomes something people can tolerate day after day. Oats, powdered milk, and honey build the breakfast side of the pantry. Peanut butter covers the hours when cooking is impossible. Each item solves a weakness in another. That is the difference between storing food and building a food system. A person can panic buy 50 unrelated products and still struggle to answer one basic question. What can we make for supper? With these 9 foods, you can see the meals immediately. That calm is part of their value, and you do not need to buy everything in one frightened afternoon. Start with the rice. Next week, add oats and beans. Slip peanut butter and canned meat into your ordinary grocery trips. Add oil, salt, honey, and powdered milk as the budget allows. Then keep the shelf moving. Write the month and year on every package. Put new food behind old food. Twice a year, spend 20 minutes inspecting the shelf. Pull the oldest items forward and move anything that needs to be used into the kitchen. That is the entire rotation system. Do not build a forgotten room. Build a pantry your household eats from. Rice, beans, oats, and salt form the long storage core. Everything else moves through ordinary life. You eat it, replace it, and keep the system alive. And if you are the only person in your household thinking about this, listen carefully. You are not paranoid. You are early. Quietly storing food for the people who depend on you is not fear. It is care. Our grandparents did not call this prepping. They called it keeping a house. They kept food close, bought a little more when it was cheap, and used the oldest first. No performance, just care made visible. Do one thing this week. Buy the rice. Then tell me in the comments, which of these 9 foods is already on your shelf? 9 good foods, 1 steady fire, and no more expensive clutter.